Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, June 24th, 2021. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
All right, Chris, let's get right into the news today. And there's sort of a fascinating tidbit from one of our good buddies, Steven Spielberg, that came out recently. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yes, rumor has it that Universal went to Spielberg and asked him basically if they could reboot Jaws, if they could make a new Jaws, I guess, franchise or a new Jaws movie. It's not entirely clear, but the bottom line is they pitched this idea to Steven Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg said, absolutely not, and we're all the better for it.
Okay, so Spielberg says no. This sounds a lot to me like the sort of Back to the Future thing where Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis have said, like, you know, basically you cannot make any new version of Back to the Future unless we sign off on it until we're dead. And then after that, you can kind of do your own thing. And obviously Jaws is like one of Spielberg's biggest and sort of most, most associated with him movies of his entire career. But Chris, if you'll humor me for a second to take the Peter Soretta role here on this episode and play devil's advocate for just a second, is there a world in which a Jaws reboot is actually a kind of a good idea with the right filmmakers behind it? Obviously, maybe if Spielberg himself was producing it or something like that, if he was involved in some way, is just the idea of a Jaws reboot so offensive to you that you couldn't conceive of a scenario in which that would work? Or do you think there is a scenario where that might work?
I don't think, I know we should never say never, but let's get real. This is a bad idea and they should not do it. I'm sure they will. I'm sure, I hope this doesn't happen for a long time, but whenever Steven Spielberg shuffles off this mortal coil, I'm positive Universal is going to be like, all right, we're remaking Jaws. But, I don't think it's a good idea. I'm not anti-remake in general. I don't think, no movies should ever be remade, but there's nothing anyone can offer to this story. Just make a new shark movie. It doesn't have to be Jaws. Just do something else. Do The Shallows Part 2. I'll watch that. But this just don't do this.
Okay. All right. I think that's a fair and level-headed answer. Speaking of level-headed, let's talk a little bit about the Fast and Furious franchise. So over the past several years, there's been a sort of a growing beef, this sort of percolating beef between Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, who are two of the biggest forces behind this franchise. The whole thing is too complicated to even recap right here, but words like candy ass were thrown around on Instagram. The general gist of it, as far as I can recall, is Vin Diesel's behavior on sets were described by some and sort of taken umbrage with as sort of like diva-ish behavior, where he would like stay in his trailer for a long time and keep people waiting on sets and stuff like that. And Dwayne Johnson in particular was somebody who did not take kindly to that kind of behavior on set. So he like called out Vin Diesel for it. There was this whole big thing. Tyrese threatened to leave the franchise at one point. There were several stories around, I think, the Fate of the Furious, which came out in 2017, that said that these guys had squashed their beef. Everything was fine. They'll be in movies together again later on in this Fast and Furious franchise. But with F9 coming out in theaters, I think tonight is when like it officially debuts. Men's Health did a profile of Vin Diesel, and they sort of asked him about these little tiffs that he was having with Dwayne Johnson. And I don't know if Vin Diesel knows what he's doing, if he's doing this to sort of twist the knife and like purposefully reignite this feud that was going on. But he essentially took credit for Dwayne Johnson's acting performance. He said, my approach at the time was a lot of tough love to assist in getting that performance where it needed to be, referring to the Hobbs character that Dwayne Johnson plays. He says, as a producer, to say, okay, we're going to take Dwayne Johnson, who's associated with wrestling, and we're going to force the cinematic world audience members to regard his character as someone that they don't know. Hobbs hits you like a ton of bricks. That's something that I'm proud of, that aesthetic. That took a lot of work. His quote goes on there, but wow, like I don't even really know what to say to this. This just seems like completely delusional behavior to me. It seems as if Diesel was basically saying here that like all of the shit talking and behind the scenes squabbling and all of that stuff was part of like a long con on his part to coax out the correct performance that he wanted from Dwayne Johnson as a producer on this franchise. So, I mean, Chris, any thoughts on this at all?
I think Vin Diesel is 100% telling the truth, and this all happened exactly the way he said it happened. Who are we to doubt Vin Diesel? He wouldn't lie to us. So he's clearly this all happened, and Dwayne Johnson, in fact, probably just owes his entire career to Dwayne Johnson, to Vin Diesel. I'm sorry. So I hope he sends him like an edible arrangement or something to thank him.
Yeah, I like that approach. I mean, I just like I cannot imagine reading that if you're Dwayne Johnson and not being like insulted or offended at somebody, at anybody really, taking credit for your work in that way. I mean, I love the Fast and Furious franchise, probably more than anybody else on the Slash Film staff. But like, oh, geez, Vin Diesel, man, you could have just maybe not said anything. I don't know. I'm very curious to see if Johnson himself is going to sort of like take the bait here and like actually respond to this. As of this recording, I checked his Instagram just a second ago to see if he'd made any sort of allusions to this or whatever, and he has not said anything. So it looks like he's being the bigger man in this instance. But
I gotta ask you, Ben, as the resident Fast and the Furious expert, do you think there's a chance that this is all for show, that Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson are both in on this? It's like a wrestling thing, basically. They're pretending to have a rivalry because they know it'll, sites like ours will be like, oh shit, we got to write about this. And there's no such thing as bad publicity anymore. So do you think there's like a chance?
I think when this whole thing first started, like 20, whatever that was, 15, 16, 17, I think I was 90% convinced that it was all fake. And I think there was a theory going around at one point that like it was going to lead to some sort of WrestleMania match or something where Vin Diesel and The Rock got in the ring together. And it was all, just sort of like a light conspiracy of like all of this is just to drive publicity and stuff. And considering Vin Diesel's, he's actually like a pretty good producer and a pretty good grand storyteller in terms of being, one of the pure creative forces behind this franchise and weaving together all of these disparate elements and coming up with like building the mythology out of a franchise that started with somebody stealing combo VHS and DVD players. So the idea of him like taking that to a meta level and sort of extending this out into a fight that isn't real but just drives attention is not crazy to me at all. But I think there's also just like real ego stuff at play here. And right. I think that's really what's going on. I wish it was all a publicity stunt because that would make me love this whole thing even more. But I really think that it's just like he feels a lot of ownership over this franchise and was really threatened by The Rock when he came in there and really like kicked it up to the next level in Fast 5. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to a different major movie star, and that's Scarlett Johansson. And she's going to be a Black Widow fairly soon. I think that maybe is probably going to be the last big Marvel thing that she's in, at least for a little while, at least that we know about. Aside from, I think she might be contributing to the What If animated series, but like basically the entire, anybody who's ever been in the MCU is pretty much going to contribute to that show. But Scarlett Johansson has a new movie in the works at Disney. Chris, tell me about that one.
It is a Tower of Terror movie based on, of course, the popular, I assume it's popular, I don't really know much about Disney stuff, but it's based on the ride at Disney. It's located at Disney's Hollywood Studios, Tokyo Disney Sea, and Walt Disney Studios Park. It used to be at Disney's California Adventure, but they shut it down to rebrand it as a Guardians of the Galaxy ride. But the gist of the Tower of Terror ride is you go into a building that's said to look like an old abandoned hotel. You get in an elevator, and that elevator drops, and you're terrified that you're going to die, and of course you're not going to. And everyone has a good time, and it's light and fun, and everyone gets off laughing. And now they're turning it into a movie with Scarlett Johansson set to star. and produce. And I should also add, this isn't the first time this happened. Back in 1997, there was a Tower of Terror movie made for TV starring Steve Guttenberg and Kirsten Dunst. And I'm pretty sure that was released like the same time they were opening the ride, and it was meant to like promote the ride.
So have you seen that movie by any chance, Chris?
I have not. I like horror stuff. I like the idea of the Tower of Terror, but I did not watch the made for TV movie.
I feel like I might have. It came out in 1997. It might have been like on the Disney Channel or something around that time, or maybe they played it in reruns a few years later or something. But man, I don't really remember any details about that. But in terms of like a Tower of Terror movie, Chris, this seems like one of the few rides at Disney World that you would, or whatever, at the Disney parks that you would actually enjoy. I mean, this and Haunted Mansion, I feel like would be your bag, because it sort of has that, that sort of like gothic aesthetic, and the little, the cast members who are dressed as like old school, hotel valet attendants and all of that kind of stuff. It just sort of seems like your vibe. Have you been to, I've probably asked you this before, but I don't remember. Have you ever been to a Disney park at all?
Yeah, I went when I was a kid to whatever the one is in Florida. I can never get them right. What is the one in Florida? Disneyland or Disney
that's
World?
Disney World. All
right. So I went to the Florida one when I was very young, and it was fine. I won a, I don't want to turn this into a long story, but my family like won the McDonald's monopoly. I think I kind of told the story.
Oh yeah, that's right.
My father used to work for McDonald's, and when he was alive, and he scammed the McDonald's monopoly, much like that docu-series McMillions. Although he didn't do it as bad as that. He didn't like make us billions of dollars. Instead, he just scammed it so that he got us a free trip on the Big Red Boat, which doesn't exist anymore. And the Big Red Boat took us to Florida and then the Bahamas, and part of the trip was Disney and Universal. And I like Universal more than Disney, but I did like the Haunted Mansion ride, and I liked the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and that's really the only two things that really stood out for me at Disney. I don't think the Tower of Terror even existed when I went.
Yeah, that's a shame. I really think that you would dig that. But man, what a wild story. I cannot believe I forgot about that story. Okay, so real quick, before we move on from that, just one more question about that, because I cannot help myself here. Did you know at the time that the whole thing was sort of rigged, or did you really think that, that this was a legitimate thing?
I absolutely knew it was rigged, and it was like a whole thing where my parents are like, don't tell anyone because we don't want to get in trouble.
You know what? Now that you say that, I think I've asked you that before on this podcast too. So I apologize to our listeners. I apologize if my memory is terrible and for making you repeat yourself, Chris.
No, it's fine. I'd rather talk about that than anything else. Let's talk about my past.
All right, let's talk about Jerry Seinfeld. That seems like a good transition here. Jerry Seinfeld is making a movie for Netflix, and he actually has some sort of distribution deal with Netflix where his comedy show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, is on that service now. He's got a couple stand-up specials that are on that service now that he's made over the past few years. But Seinfeld is actually going to be making like a narrative feature film, which, he was the star of Seinfeld, which is like one of the biggest and most successful sitcoms of all time. But he has not really had much of a movie career. He sort of, I think he co-wrote and produced and lent his voice to the animated movie Bee Movie, and that was in 2007. And he has not really done much beyond, popping up in little cameo parts here and there. But this sounds like he's going to direct, produce, co-write, and star in a movie called Unfrosted, which is going to be about the creation of Pop-Tarts. And I kind of thought that was a joke for a second when I saw this, but evidently Jerry Seinfeld has been doing a bit in his stand-up about the creation of Pop-Tarts for over 10 years now. The earliest version I could find on YouTube dated back to 2010, where the bit is just, him talking about like how his life and his friends' lives changed so dramatically when Pop-Tarts were invented in the mid 60s, and like how, everything I'm not going to do it justice, but I've embedded a couple of videos.
Ben, do the bit, do the whole bit.
I've not committed it to memory.
Do the Seinfeld voice and everything.
What's the deal?
Pop-Tarts.
Yeah. So Spike Feresten and Barry Martyr, who are two guys who have worked with Seinfeld on the show Seinfeld. They also co-wrote B-Movie with him, are co-writing the script for Unfrosted. And yeah, Jerry Seinfeld is going to be directing and starring in this movie. He said, "Stuck at home while watching endless sad faces on TV, I thought this would be a good time to make something based on pure silliness. So we took my Pop-Tarts stand-up bit from my last Netflix special and exploded it into a giant, crazy comedy movie." That's kind of all we have to go on here in terms of like plot details. I guess it's just about the invention of Pop-Tarts. I'm not sure how that squares with his description of a giant, crazy comedy movie, but in 2018, he tweeted, "At one point, I was thinking about an invention of the Pop-Tart movie. Imagine the drunk on sugar power Kellogg's cereal culture of the mid-60s in Battle Creek, Michigan. That's a vibe I could work with." So that was, yeah, like I said, 2018. That was several years ago. And now this movie is actually coming to pass. I think I saw somebody on Twitter say that this is going to be the first time that Jerry Seinfeld appears in a movie that, or maybe appears in anything that is where he's not playing a version of him, like where he's actually playing a fictional character. So this is kind of a notable film in that regard. Chris, where are you on Jerry Seinfeld these days? Have you checked in, kept up with him at all, or what is your take on the Seinfeld show and his sort of legacy as a comedian?
I watched episodes of Seinfeld. I haven't seen like the whole thing. I was never really huge into Seinfeld. It's not like it's not like I disliked it. I just never was like, I know it was like a big thing and it was like a big cultural thing. And I just never got really swept up in it. I think Jerry Seinfeld can be funny, I guess. I don't, he's not like, if someone was like, who's a comedian you find really funny, he would not even be like in the top like 30 for me probably. So yeah. But as for this, I'm ready to retire at this point because
I was going to say, do you think there's any potential in a story, a movie about the creation of Pop-Tarts?
It's tough because I'm in a bad headspace right now. So everything just seems bleak to me, but man, the fact that we're entering this period where Hollywood is like, I don't know what the fuck to do. Maybe we should make origin stories for snack foods. Cause they're making the Red Hot Cheetos movie too. And it's like, is this where we are now? Where like Hollywood just is like so fucking bankrupt that all they can greenlight right now it's got to be something like that's all they want now. The audience has to know what it is. It can't be something new. So what does the audience know? Food. Let's make an origin of food. Like next there's going to be like the fucking Big Mac origin story. I guess we kind of already got that with the Michael Keaton, the Founder movie. I don't know. It's just, and that movie was fine, I guess. So maybe there is a chance you could make something fun about the invention of Pop-Tarts. Just like, what is that story? Like,
yeah, I hope that that it sounds more creatively bankrupt in this sort of brief form where we don't have any actual details about what's going on than it ultimately feels when we get to see this thing and it's done. I am a little intrigued by his description of it as this giant, crazy comedy movie because it sounds, I mean, like the comp, as they say in Hollywood, is the Founder to me. It's just like a small scale sort of human story about the creation of this thing. And we've seen movies like that a ton of times, but I would never refer to any of those as like giant or crazy. And even the comedy aspect of it is maybe a little bit unique in this space. So, and like the idea of Seinfeld, putting all of his chips in this basket and sort of stepping into the movie world in a big way, in a way that he hasn't before. I'm intrigued by this, but yeah, I definitely share your skepticism at like, and just general disdain with the concept of intellectual property expanding out into foods now instead of just, we're past the point where like we're no longer just recycling old movies. It's now, the reach has expanded and we're now grabbing at any recognizable thing at all. So
everything is becoming a commercial. Basically, we're gonna get like fucking like the Bud Light movie next. Like this is where we're going, where everything is just going to double. It's like a movie and also an ad. That's where we're headed. And
yeah, man, I don't know. I if that's true, and Chris, I wouldn't put it past Hollywood for the industry to sort of really adopt that franchise in a legitimate way. I just hope that there's enough creativity out there where people can take these concepts that sound terrible and in sort of a Lord and Miller style, and actually do something that makes them feel not quite as soulless as they initially appear. So we'll have to see if that's the case for Unfrosted, which I couldn't even keep a straight face finishing that sentence. But all right, I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode of Slash Film Daily. You can find more about all of the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com, of course, and linked inside the show notes of this episode. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all of the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends, spread the word. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.